forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
And greetings. Welcome to our latest episode of Bigger Ten. It's one of, I think, my favorite episodes we do every year. I'm Steve Dace. He is my co-host, never partner, the one and only Aaron McIntyre. Good to see you, my friend. Are you ready to go?
You better believe it. I've been slowly but surely making my way through the Athlon college football preview. I'm about almost done with the ACC preview, and I'm soaking up every syllable of this. I got it extra early this year. You've been very kind in years past and given me your copy once you're done with it. I always find myself, though, like coming up to the edge of football season and not even getting halfway through it. So I'm just like, I need an escape, an extra escape. That's been my escape the last few weekends.
You know, we are just over a month until Big Ten football media days.
Yep.
So, I mean, and then practices in the Big Ten start the very next week. I know Michigan begins August 1. So we're not waiting much longer. Dude, you know how many days until the NFL Hall of Fame game?
Yeah, last I checked, which was yesterday, I think it was 45 days. 45 days.
You know what? Amy and I are taking vacation in August.
Mm-hmm.
We started doing this thing where we want to tour halls of fame. And so we started with the Country Music Hall of Fame when I had to speak in Nashville in January.
Yep.
And in August, we are going to go do the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
Excellent.
And then since Canton is only about an hour drive, we're going over to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We're going over there mid to late August is when we're going to do that. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've been having my wife just remind me not to wish the summer away, but I will say, Independence Day and the All-Star break and game for Major League Baseball, those are kind of the last two humps before football season.
Yep.
NFL training camps open up in less than a month.
As I get older, I actually, as much as I love the fall, I don't want to wish the summer away either, because as I get older, my body wants that warm temperature a lot more than the cold.
I hear you.
But the beauty of the football season is the summer leading up to it is almost as much fun as the games, the anticipation, the plotting, the predictions, right? I mean, that's almost as much fun as the season in and of itself. So it's almost like once we get into June and the football magazines hit the shelves, it's kind of like that's the start of the season. Like we get like a full, if you count it all together, it's, kind of the preseason in a way. Well, you mentioned Athlons. Every year we do this episode where we go through the anonymous Big Ten coach quotes from the Big Ten portion of Athlon's college football preview. There is usually gold there, Jerry, gold. And, these things can be pretty long. So the last couple of years, I've picked out like a money line or two from each of them that I think would be fascinating to discuss. And then we go through and react to them and give our take on them. We're going to do this by division, Aaron. So we're going to do the Big Ten East first and then the Big Ten West.
Yeah, and so something I noticed this year, now maybe this has been the same in all previous iterations of this, but something I noticed this year with Athlons, it's specifying Big Ten assistant coach. I always assumed assumed they were head coaches, and maybe that's different this year, but that's the first year I've noticed that. I
was listening to the Athlon's podcast with the guys. Steve Lassen is like the guy who puts their football magazine together.
Yep.
And he was saying the first thing he looks at when it comes into the inbox every year are these coach quotes to see what they say. And he says one of the biggest challenges that they have every year is they've got to dress the quotes up so you can't trace back who it is. Because a lot of times a coach is like, well, yeah, when we played those guys last October, they ran all over us. We just go look at the schedule, right? Figure out who that was, right? Or we played them and they sucked, So trying to figure out how they, frame these quotes so you can't trace who it is, all right? So let's get to it. Let's start with this in alphabetical order. In the Big Ten East, we begin with Indiana. Quote, probably the most uncertain team in the league going into the season. They've been working a lot on the transfer portal and losing a lot too. That's not a good sign. They are not making enough noise in high school recruiting. And so, Aaron, one of the things that we have seen in the first few years of the transfer portal is, unlike college basketball where you can kind of, until he got another DUI, you could kind of Bobby Huggins this thing every year.
Yeah.
Just bring in 3, 4, 5 guys because you're only filling a few spots. You're only playing 5 guys at a time. what we have seen so far in the transfer portal, and Michigan State's an example of this in our league, is if it's okay to go to it right away when you first take over as a coach to fill holes in the roster, but trying to rely on it year in and year out, you often do so at the expense of your high school recruiting, and that's still going to be and has to be the foundation of your program. And I think that's what this coach is saying here is they went for it in the portal and maybe had some initial success. Now they're losing guys. They've lost ground in high school recruiting. And I think if you're a Michigan State football fan in our league that's used the portal a lot, you'd probably say the same thing.
I think that's the big takeaway from this particular quote is the general sentiment that you kind of get an insight into the transfer portal and player development. And here's the bottom line, and this is my bottom line, one of my bottom line worries about college football in general, is in an era of the transfer portal where it is the Wild West right now, you still indeed, and this is indicated in that quote, you still have to rely on those guys that you can develop and buy into the program and culture.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a program and culture that's either a legacy or that's already performing very well or shown that it can perform in recent memory, you're kind of screwed. You're kind of screwed because the likelihood that you'll get guys in there who want to buy into your culture are diminished. You still have to recruit high schoolers, and you still have to find guys that are willing, that are kind of cornerstones of your program, that are willing to buy in for a number of years. And that's the problem right now with a lot of these kind of mid to lower tier teams in the Big Ten especially, that they are going to the transfer portal and living and dying by that. Some of them, you can live by that once or twice, but you can certainly I think there are more examples of dying by that, and I think Indiana is one of those.
I think if you look at what the top three teams in the East in our league have done, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State this last year all brought in somewhere between 6 to 10 guys, all very highly rated, and they're kind of the frosting on the cake, right? You've got maybe a guy went pro on you, you've got a last minute or two roster, that you need to you want to fulfill and plug that hole, but they're not the formation or the foundation, I should say, of your roster, because the key word I thought that you used there, culture. And if we go back to when Tom Allen and Indiana had the big breakthrough season in 2020, when frankly a lot of people thought they got robbed by not with the way the Big Ten was deciding the championship that year because of Ohio State's COVID losses, that was all culture. I mean, you saw that was a program he had built over several years. Those guys came in, they bought into him. What's the culture of Indiana football right now? And for that matter, what's the culture of Michigan State football right now? I think we are learning that you can't do 20 to 25 guys in the portal every year because you end up losing 20 to 25 guys who are like, okay, I guess you brought that guy in to replace me. And even if that guy that you're losing isn't going to start, he's depth. He's insurance. He's your culture. So I thought that was a great point that you made. All right, next up, Maryland. It feels like a broken record here. Lots and lots of talent, very athletic at the skill positions, smart coaches and high-level recruiters, but the program never puts all the pieces together. Now, let me say about Maryland, when I was going through and I'm putting together what's going to be my annual college football preview as we speak, Maryland is actually playing Michigan and Penn State each at the perfect time on the schedule. They get Penn State the week before Penn State goes down to Columbus against Ohio State. They get Michigan the week after Michigan is at Penn State and before Michigan goes home to host Ohio State. I mean, those would be classic letdown spots. Here's the problem with that, though, Aaron. Michigan and Penn State have just demolished Maryland since they came into the league. Why? Well, it's the same problem as this year. Maryland loses all 5 starters to the offensive line. Defensive line's not that good. Their skill position talent isn't much different. Isn't much of a drop off from what Michigan and Penn State have at all. But can they stand up in the trenches against them on both sides of the ball for 70 snaps? In our league, it is hard to finesse your way to wins. It's hard to finesse your way to consistency. And I think that's one of the reasons why they have a lot of top-line talent that looks good at skill positions, and they bring back little Tua, and that's good. But can they hold up in the trenches? In our league, that's where games are won and lost.
Yeah, and, I think Maryland is one of the reasons, Penn State obviously the other one, but Maryland is one of the reasons I think in the Big Ten East this year, there is a chance for more chaos than you have seen in years past. Obviously, Michigan being competitive now and beating Ohio State a couple of times, that makes the entire division more entertaining, but I think Maryland and definitely Penn State are two of the reasons why we could see some things going down to the wire in ways that we have not seen in years past in the Big Ten. in the Big Ten East. I think this quote sounds like it could come from Penn State, from a Penn State perspective.
Explaining why we kick these guys' ass every year.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where this came from, and that's my lament as well. It's like you see Maryland out there. They look really fast. They look really good. And then at some point, they look really good in the non-conference slate, seemingly year in and year out. And then at some point, they just face plant, and they look decent sometimes the rest of the year. But after that first face plant, it really seems like they have a hard time picking themselves off the mat. And you see that in years past in the Big Ten schedule and the grueling schedule that is. I think that's where what your point about the trenches come into play. Can you hold up over a 9-game conference schedule? The teams that can will be competitive to the end. The teams that can't will not.
Mm-hmm. All right, next up. Michigan, quote, last season sealed it for them. This is a different program. It's reload, not rebuild, which is not something they were able to do like Ohio State or an SEC team. At the very top, that's a calm, consistent culture, end quote. I have nothing to add to this. I do think last year kind of sealed it. You're talking about a team that will be preseason top 3 again this year. Next year, they're going to lose an awful lot, but they're putting together maybe Harbaugh's best recruiting class as we speak. So maybe next year they dip to like an 8-4, 9-3 team with their losses and USC and UCLA coming in. But I foresee that, provided Harbaugh stays, which is always a big if with him, they'll probably just go from there to right back to where they have been the last few years. But I want to know what you think is kind of more of an outsider. To me, it feels like it took longer than I thought, but it feels like we are now the program we expected to be when Jim Harbaugh was hired.
Yeah, so I've been going through and watching last year's Iowa games during my workouts, and that's actually really good as an Iowa fan because it makes me angry. And
when you're on offense?
Yeah, it makes me very angry.
I can do another rep.
It makes me very angry, and that motivates me to keep running on the treadmill. And the game that I started to watch yesterday was Iowa versus Michigan, actually. And yeah, it was a big noon game. It was the big noon kickoff. It was an 11 a.m. start, but I was at that game. I mean, the atmosphere was juiced already, and to come in on a 5-minute drive and just pound the ball down Iowa's defense, the vaunted defense's throat, that speaks to what I think this quote is talking about, is that they have established themselves. This is not just a fluke. And I think the ceiling is even higher now with the second-year quarterback and J.J. McCarthy having one season under his belt now, having a college football playoff, another a Big Ten championship under his belt. If anything, I think the ceiling is even higher for this team. They really should have won the national title last year. Really should have. They were, I think, 2 or 3 plays away from walking into a game against TCU. Walking out of that game against TCU and walking into, another one against Georgia or Ohio State. Probably should have been Ohio State. They were close to winning the national championship. You could make an argument they probably should have, but I think their ceiling is even higher this year.
All right, next quote. We mentioned Michigan State. Let's go to them. Quote, and this is my note. This is before the transfers of Keon Coleman and Peyton Thorne. Quote, they're the 50-50 program in the league. You never know what you're going to get when they line up against you. If they can create a strong defensive identity, it's possible Mel Tucker can get things turned around again, end quote. This was before they lost their starting quarterback and easily their number one offensive weapon in Keon Coleman. I think that establishing an identity is again, the big problem when you are taking so many transfers. What is your culture? And one of the things I've seen the last couple of years watching Michigan State in the spring, when we've done those shows with my thoughts on watching the spring games, Aaron, I've come in here a few years in a row and said, man, Michigan State looks really small compared to Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. You know what I think that is? I think a lot of that is your transfers maybe come in later or and maybe aren't ready yet. And so those are the high school guys that you're not fully developing yet, because you don't have that foundation, that plumb line in your program from a roster standpoint. Because again, when you bring in a 20-year-old transfer, Aaron, you are saying something far more direct to your number 2 at that position than you are when you bring in even a 4-star 18-year-old kid, because that guy still knows, well, is he physically ready? Does he know the scheme? Does he know how to be a college football player? It's not immediate when you bring in even a 4-star to be your starting right tackle or to be a right tackle. Your backup right tackle who's been waiting his turn doesn't immediately think he's going to lose his job to an 18-year-old kid. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
When you sign a transfer, though, who's a grown-ass man, he does. And he joins the transfer portal, too. Because he's like, well, you've already recruited over me, so I'm out. And that does, in terms of creating competition, meritocracy, that word you use, culture, I think it's incredibly prohibitive to build your program like that.
Not just individual programs, but the entire sport as a whole with the transfer portal. You know, I've been watching the third and fourth seasons of Last Chance, rewatching them. I think for the first time since I actually watched the season 3 and 4 of Last Chance U.
Oh, man, I forgot about that show. I loved that show.
Yeah. You had a cameo in... I think it was season 4.
That's right. I forgot. I do. Yeah. Because I was commenting on what's his nuts.
Yeah,
the guy
Jason Brown.
Yes. Yeah. That he was kind of
Stone
a clown.
Cold Hustler.
Yeah.
Well, shut up.
Yeah.
But the same dynamic on that you see playing out on that show. Those guys, yeah, they're on their last chance, and that's kind of the gist of the show. But those guys are there for them. They're there for them. And the entirety of college football right now has opened itself up to this notion that every single player is there for them. Now, that's not true in all places. You've got good guys on probably every team that are committed to that team, committed to that coach. But this opens yourself up to that possibility that you're bringing in a lot of guys that are just there for them, that are just there for them. And in this sport, unlike basketball, and like other sports as well, that cannot work in football long term. It just cannot work in football long term. You are putting your neck out on the line every single play, and that cohesiveness that's required to build a winning team and a winning culture, again, the buzzword, that has to develop over time with guys who are committed to each other. And in the transfer portal, unless you got the rare unicorn, that just cannot happen long term. And so this quote. It was more glowing, but I think that was more glowing than I would even put it. I think it was more glowing because it was prior to those transfers you discussed.
Yeah, I think it'd be a little different.
I think
after.
It would be a little more dire now.
It'd be more like, what the hell is going on there?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next up, the Ohio State University quote, the biggest question is who replaces C.J. Stroud. The reality is neither of the two guys behind him is that kind of quarterback. They're just not going to be as good there, but that doesn't mean the sky is falling, end quote. And so, to me, this quote says that Ohio State may have to do something, and Kyle McCord was not impressive in the spring, but remember, Justin Fields didn't look great his first spring game either. Okay, now he had not been in a program for 3 years like Kyle McCord has, but the analogy still kind of stands. But maybe Ohio State has not had to play complementary football for several years because of how great that offense is. This may be a year where instead of scoring 39 points a game, they score like 34 or 35. And maybe the defense has to pick up more of the complementary and slack here if you're not going to have a quarterback that we know right now is going to continue the Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud first-round draft pick trend.
Yeah, I've got $5 on Kyle McCord. I think at 25 to 1 to win the Heisman. If you're going to give me 25 to 1 on any Ohio State quarterback to win the Heisman, I'd say that's a good value bet. I think my analysis earlier this year is that with the riches of the wide receiver position specifically at Ohio State, they could elevate the game of their quarterback. And so how good do you really need your quarterback? And that's not to take anything away from C.J. Stroud at all. How good do you really need your quarterback to be at Ohio State when you have those types of skill position players? We might find that out this year. But overall, yeah, I think the defensive side of the ball in now year 2 of I think this is year 2 of their new defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles. That's going to be as big of a question mark or as big of a factor in Ohio State's success as anything. I think this quote too, we've got a few new coaches in the league. I think this actually could have come from the other side of the conference. I think Luke Fickell not Luke Fickell, but probably a Wisconsin staff member actually probably might have been able to give some insight on this one because I can't figure who this would come from the Eastern Division.
So last year, Ohio State lost 2 first-round draft picks, well, 3 if you count Jamison Williams, who transferred at receiver, and still had the two best receivers in our league. Now, one of them didn't really play a meaningful snap all year because of injury. This year, they lost that kid to the first round of the draft. They still have the two best receivers in our league, and Emeka Ibuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. It's crazy what Brian Hartline and Ryan Day have done recruiting that position at Ohio State. Penn State, quote, down the stretch last year, they got tougher, which is a really big deal because they're always talented, but not always tough. If Drew Allar is as good as everyone thinks, this is their window, end quote. I don't disagree with any of that. I would say they got tougher against a very soft schedule down the stretch last year, but, and I think people undervalue this when they just point to the level of competition card, but they looked the way you're supposed to look if you're Penn State against those teams as well. And remember, I kept telling you all of last year with where they were at in recruiting, this was a 2023 team. And I agree with the Drew Allar angle. I think that he is the most important player in the conference heading into the season. How ready is he to live up to, I was the number one pro-style quarterback in the country according to 24/7 Sports? Potential. Because if he is, there are not a lot of other holes. They maybe don't have the great road, road tech or road grader, or I should say stuffer at nose, but there aren't a lot of power running teams in our league. Michigan's one of them, unfortunately. And you saw that when they played last year, what happened there. But everywhere else, they're just as talented and athletic as Michigan and Ohio State. The question is, they don't have an offensive system like, Kyle McCord's going to walk into. They don't have a proven commodity like J.J. McCarthy, but Drew Allar was, or is it Aller? I can't remember. He was actually a higher profiled recruit than even J.J. was. That's the question. And I think if he's ready, then I think at the end of the year, Aaron, when we have that last college football playoff special on that first Sunday in December, we're going to see Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, all three of them in that last screen somewhere in the top 6. If he's not, then they're probably looking at going 10-2 again.
Yeah, I think Penn State, another factor for them is there going to be, I hate these buzzwords, but is there going to be an X factor that emerges on offense? Now, their running back stable is pretty good, but is there somebody on the outside who can kind of emerge to take some of that pressure off of Allar? Because whether or not he lives up to the expectations, he's still really young. He's going to need something else on offense that can kind of take the pressure off of him in some of these situations. But you talk about the style of Penn State. Again, they've got Michigan at noon. I don't know when they play Ohio State yet. Actually, that was announced. I think isn't that going to be at night at some point? Regardless, I like their chances against Ohio State as it stands now on paper. I like their chances against Ohio State a lot better than I do against Michigan, just because of the style of play. I think Michigan right now, they have definitely established themselves as the kind of ground and pound identity. But going back to this quote, I don't really have much to disagree with either. I think this is going to be the year that can you elevate things after kind of just a wishy-washy last couple of seasons for James Franklin.
Michigan, by the way, dodges a bullet second time in a row. They don't have to do the whiteout at Penn State because of TV and the Big Noon Sunday or Big Noon Saturday stuff. All right, let's close it out with the East. In the East with Rutgers, quote, whatever buzz Greg Schiano had by going back is pretty much gone. The school seems committed to him long term, but they haven't made any kind of real step up to being a Big Ten level program, end quote. I can't add any more than that. I think that summarizes things pretty good.
Yeah. It's tough to do in the East. I mean, this could be a situation where getting rid of divisions actually might be a benefit.
Might be the one team it actually helps. Yeah.
So
they don't have to play those three every single. Maybe it helps Maryland too.
Yeah,
I could see that too. All right, we'll come back. We'll talk anonymous coach quotes with the Big Ten West next. All right, back here on one of our favorite episodes every year on Bigger Ten, going through the anonymous coach quotes from Athlon Sports College Football Preview. Make sure to pick it up. They do an outstanding job every single year. We did the Big Ten East, Aaron. Let's now begin the Big Ten West. In alphabetical order with Illinois. Quote, Bielema has really created a winning culture there in a short amount of time, but they could take a step back this season with as much as they've turned over. But they're more Wisconsin than Wisconsin now, end quote. I kind of, what fascinated me about this one is I think these two quotes are actually in conflict. Because if they're more Wisconsin than Wisconsin now, then I'm not so sure they take as much of a step back as people think. You know what I'm saying? Like, The culture is set. The program, the style is there. The parts are interchangeable. Like you may not have a running back as good as Chase Brown, but the next guy's running for 1,000 or 1,200 yards. You see what I'm saying? He might not be 1,500 yards, but he's going to be a top 5 rusher in the Big Ten. If that's true. If it's not true, then maybe they do take a step back. But if it is true, I'm not sure they take as much of a step back as maybe some people are thinking.
Yeah, I mean, just based on the changes at Wisconsin, the vast changes at Wisconsin, this would be true even if they did take a step back, because, I mean, that's Brett Bielema's MO. I mean, he helped sustain that culture in Wisconsin, so I understand where this is coming from, and I don't know. I really don't know what to make of Illinois. They're one of those teams we always say that should be a lot better than they have been over the last 10 seasons or so. And if there's anybody who can actually turn them into what they're capable of being, it's Brett Bielema. But I would agree that they are more Wisconsin than Wisconsin right now. That might have even been true if Wisconsin hadn't changed course. But they've completely remade their identity up there in Madison.
Yeah, that was really the game last year when it was clear they had turned the corners when they went to Madison and kicked Wisconsin's ass. Yep. All right, next up, let's talk your beloved Iowa Hawkeyes. Quote, they portaled out a lot of their best offensive players, which is a really scary situation when you're that bad to begin with, and it puts a scary amount of pressure on Cade McNamara, end quote. I picked this excerpt of the quote because I was surprised at how alarmist it was. I think Cade McNamara is a perfect quarterback for what you guys ask of your quarterback. I think Luke Lachey and Eric All, if you can keep him healthy, that tight end duo will be the best tight end duo in the Big Ten. I assume, even with the guys Iowa lost, finding at least a competent Big Ten running back is not difficult at Iowa. And yes, I know the offensive line wasn't great last year by Iowa standards, but it was very young. All 5 guys are back. I'm actually higher on Iowa than this quote is, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that far through Athlon, but all of their national stuff, all of their top 25 stuff, not that I should expect this every year from Iowa, but no mention. It's just like Iowa is a complete non-factor in the national conversation. It's not like they haven't earned that, especially with their offensive side of the ball the last 2 years especially. But yeah, the more I'm kind of thinking over this, they're not going to light it up. They're not going to go 12-0. But I don't think the non-factor kind of vibe that I'm getting from the national conversation about the Hawkeyes is necessarily accurate, if that makes sense. And really, how scary is it if you transferred a lot of your best players on a terrible unit? Really? I mean, how much worse can it get? Caleb Johnson is their running back. He showed some really positive flashes last year. He's pretty fast, but he runs really, really hard. And then that wide receiver transfer they got from Ohio State.
Caleb Brown.
Yeah. We were just talking about how
we tried to recruit Caleb Johnson, by the way, FYI.
Yeah, the running back, yeah. And so, we just talked about how Ohio State recruits wide receivers. So, I mean, I can't believe he'd be that bad. So, there is a ceiling with this offense, or at least there's a hope with this offense that I haven't had for the last couple of years. They just got to show that to me.
All right, let's continue here in the Big Ten West. Let's go over to Minnesota. I completely agree with this first statement. Quote, they're big as the best teams in this league on the lines. Blew me away watching their spring game with all the guys they have lost. Physically, they looked like Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State. Not saying those guys may be as skilled, but in terms of size, they look like those teams getting off the bus. Quote, we're unsure about the quarterback situation. I think it's Athlon Kaliakmanis. Is that how it's?
Athlon Kaliakmanis.
Athlon Kaliakmanis. I better get used to it. He's going to be the quarterback. Athlon Kaliakmanis has had limited reps, but the staff really likes him, end quote. The first one, like I said, I agree completely with the first statement. The second part, it is very clear. If you talk, I listened to some Minnesota podcasts. They have been waiting for this Kaliakmanis. Is that what it is?
Kaliakmanis.
Kaliakmanis. Thank you. That within Minnesota's fandom, fans, certain tropes and stuff get developed because the team more than the national guys do. They have been waiting for this kid to kind of become the quarterback, and he looked good last year when Tanner Morgan got hurt. So That could be in a league where one game is the difference between going in a division 5-4 or 6-3 and winning the division on tiebreakers. Obviously, the quarterback position could be the difference in that, Aaron.
Yeah, and what I saw of him last year, it wasn't bad. It wasn't eye-catching or eye-popping necessarily.
Didn't he light up Wisconsin's defense? I thought he did last year when they played.
Yeah, but overall, over the course of the season. But their win total, you know what their win total is?
6.5, I think.
6.5 right now. So
because they have lost a ton.
They have lost a ton, but at least from what I've seen as well, because I did watch that spring game too, and I largely agree with your sentiment or takeaways from that. Yeah, I wouldn't sleep on Minnesota quite yet. Well, I mean, they could just faceplant, at the start of the season, like anybody could, but they could faceplant. But I think this is one of those teams where we'll be able to get a pretty good wrap on pretty quickly at the start of the season. So PJ Fleck, don't doubt him, I guess is what I would say.
I thought they were clearly the most balanced team in the division last year. They should have won it last year. And I think they're a 2024 team, probably looking at their roster. But in the Big Ten West, unless you're Northwestern these days, it could pretty much always be your year. Okay, next up here in the Big Ten West, Nebraska, quote, Matt Rule is a legitimately good college football coach. They're a sleeping giant. Now, this is very intriguing. Listen to this. Because every other staff in the league knows what they're building in NIL. They do it the right way and strike deals with players who can be foundational pieces, end quote. What this says to me is that they may have their ducks in a row administratively. You've got a former football star there, and Trev Alberts now is the AD. He's as Nebraska as it gets. He knows the ecosystem. He knows the tradition, the heritage. He's a part of it. And so they've got their administrative ducks in a row. The administration knows what it's going to take to play ball, to recruit to kind of the remote outpost of the league. Well, Steve, USC and UCLA are out west, but they have recruiting regions native to them. Nebraska does not. All right, Nebraska has no native recruiting region. It has in our league. It has to go to other regions to recruit. That means it has to have its NIL program in place, Aaron. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay. So what this is telling me is that the word is out. Trev Alberts knows what he's doing, knows what is going to have to happen, and now they might actually have a football coach that could execute that plan. That's how I took it anyway. What'd you think?
Yeah, that's glowing praise from whoever that quote came from. And, Nebraska, that's kind of Nebraska football in that area of the country. Listen, Nebraska, sparsely populated state. Lincoln, Omaha, that entire area, pretty densely populated, actually. Omaha has got over 1 million people in its population, and then I don't know even what the region of eastern Nebraska is like, but there's a lot of people who live there, and Nebraska football especially is the only show in town, so there's a lot of money, a lot of business in Omaha as well. So this is not some mom and pop. If you followed college football, of course, this is not some mom and pop operation. There's some serious money when it comes to Nebraska football. And this is kind of the yin to the yang of the transfer portal. If you are a program that has means like Nebraska does, the difference between using the transfer portal for you and transfer portal at some place like Indiana, as that coach quote that we talked about in the last segment, they recruit players who want to have an opportunity to play. Nebraska has the means to recruit players via NIL who expect to win. Those are two big differences. That's just a huge difference. You're just kind of, if you're Indiana or Michigan State, the way they've shown, they're just kind of grabbing guys. Hey, I think we can get this guy. I think he can do some things. Nebraska, I think, is positioning themselves, or at least this quote seems to indicate that they're positioning themselves to land big fish, and those they can put themselves in an echelon of football program very quickly if they're able to execute that and translate it into wins on the field.
Let's move over to Northwestern now. Quote, maybe they just don't have the chip on the shoulder anymore. Oh, man, that's
a slap in the face.
That's the friend zone comments. Yep. Of all the friend zone comment, that's the chief friend zone comment we have had of all of them here. Pat Fitzgerald showed me he could shake up his staff. I think he needs to keep self-evaluating. That's... Yikes was my response to reading that. Okay.
I think he is going to keep self-evaluating, and I think he might keep self-evaluating himself elsewhere in the near future. I don't think Northwestern's ever going to fire him. I don't think he's going to leave there in any terms but his own. But I just, if you're a guy like that who's ultra competitive, the biggest chip on the shoulder for the longest time of them all, maybe, of the Big Ten coaches, you got to think you come to the point, the fork in the road, where it's like, how much further can I take this program? Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably what he's going to do. Not that I have any special insight into that, but just human nature, analyzing human nature. I don't know how much longer he is for Northwestern.
Next, Purdue, defending division champion, quote, Jeff Brom didn't leave the program in bad condition at all. Long term, they need to recruit better and find an identity in recruiting. Hudson Card is really good. That could be a surprise team this year, end quote. Again, I chose this one because I just completely disagree with it. I don't know what the proof is that Hudson Card is that good. And you're going from an offensive wunderkind in Jeff Brom to a defensive wunderkind in Ryan Walters, but he has no track record as a head coach. Brom had been a head coach already. They lose a ton. I just,
your entire offense is gone. Basically,
yeah. I don't.
Your entire offense
I don't see
is
the optimism
gone.
Here at all. Actually,
yeah, your entire offense is gone. Basically, Charlie Jones and the quarterback's name that I can't remember off the top of my head. Your offense is gone.
O'Connell, is you're talking about.
Thank you. Your offensive gone, and then you hired a defensive guy. So maybe they'll be good on defense. I don't know where they go. I don't know where they go on offense. So I'm not sure. Maybe the rest of the program. Yeah, maybe there is some there that I just don't see right now. But a surprise team this year? No, I don't see that.
They've got one of the toughest non-conference schedules in our conference, too, if you check it out. And finally, Wisconsin, quote, the strangest hire of the offseason was Phil Longo coming to Wisconsin. It's like Luke Fickell knows something no one else does, or he's about to make a major mistake, end quote. I could have written this quote.
Yep.
I agree with every syllable of this. This thing either works spectacularly or, can you say, Rich Rod? This just watching them in the spring reminded me so much of watching Michigan's first spring under Rich Rod trying to run that offense with quarterbacks that just don't have the skill set for it. Except in this case, Wisconsin brought Tanner Mordecai in, who supposedly had the skill set for it based on what he did at SMU. Aaron, he threw 5 interceptions in the spring game and was sacked 10 times. Now, people are going to say, well, Steve, the weather was terrible. This is the Big Ten. Okay? This is the Big Ten. It's not easy to throw the football in the state of Wisconsin 50 times a game. I don't know, man. I thought that they could have I went into the spring thinking they were going to have a very quick rebuild, maybe as soon as like this year under Luke with what they had done in the transfer portal. But man, watching them in the spring made me go, Steve Carell, yikes. And maybe I've just got Rich Rod PTSD, but this reminds me so much of that. The old coach retires. He went to the AD. He's still around. Lloyd Carr was still around. You've got this style that was for 30 years through multiple head coaches, very successful at Wisconsin. You completely abandon it in one fell swoop. That's kind of what we did at Michigan after Lloyd Carr retired and Rich Rod got hired. I don't know, man. I am worried about this. I do think it is a feast or famine choice.
Yeah, and I don't think enough people, everybody's rightly focusing on Luke Fickell changing the offensive identity. They lost their defensive coordinator, too. That was the part of Wisconsin, regardless of how good or not they were or whether or not they had a Heisman-worthy or contending running back. That was the part of Wisconsin that allowed them to just stay in games, stay around, and just kind of win the battle of attrition at the line of scrimmage and then wait for your opponent to make a mistake, and then bam, you can house them or at least wear them down. That was their identity. It was a defensive team. They had some really good running backs through the years, and some okay quarterbacks, competent enough quarterbacks. I don't think enough was being made about the defensive side of the ball. And I agree with the analysis. This is either going to be a boom or bust for Wisconsin.
When you're throwing that many picks in a spring game, what that tells me is your guys can't get separation. I know a thing
or two about that.
Yeah, I just don't think they have the personnel to run this, but we shall see. All right, we'll come back and we'll have our feedback of the week and our Twitter poll results when we do. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, what is the biggest question mark heading into the 2023 Big Ten football season? Number one on the list by vote tally, the Iowa offense with 45%. 22% said the drop-off from C.J. Stroud. 18% said Wisconsin's metamorphosis, which we were just discussing. 15% said, is Drew Allar ready? I would actually rank it Drew Allar, number one, Wisconsin, number two, Stroud, number three, and Iowa, number four. I don't know what the question marks around the Iowa offense are at all. They're going the same offense.
Yeah.
They just have a competent quarterback now. I don't see question marks there, actually. To me, the far bigger question mark at Iowa is, should I be concerned that you're replacing maybe the best linebacker, or certainly along with Josie Jewell, the best linebacker the program's had since Chad Greenway a decade or 15 years ago, with a kid that's not even on camp, that didn't even it was a mid-year or postseason transfer from Arizona. That's a bigger question mark to me than the Iowa offense.
Yeah, somebody's going to have to emerge at linebacker for Iowa. I would have ranked this if I was, if you're an Iowa fan, of course this is going to be your biggest concern, so we must have a lot of Iowa fans watching or listening. If I was to do my best to put on my objective hat here, I would rank this actually drop off from C.J. Stroud. I mean, that's the number one or number two, number 1A, number 1B brand in the conference.
True.
Drop off from C.J. Stroud would be number one. Allar, number two. Actually, no, Wisconsin would probably put number two because of their history and whether or not what we just talked about. And then number three, Allar, is he ready? And then number four, I would put the Iowa offense. If we're looking at this from a conference perspective and getting rid of your preferred fan base, that's how I would rank it.
That brings us to our feedback of the week, which isn't really feedback this week because I thought this was interesting from Brett McMurphy. Let me try that again. Brett McMurphy at the Action Network. These are the top schools in 2022 in athletic department revenue. The Big Ten, well represented here. Ohio State, number one, Michigan, number four, Penn State, number 9, Michigan State, 12, Indiana, 13. That's probably a surprise to some people. You've got next Iowa at 21 and Illinois at 24. Do you notice who is not on this list? USC and UCLA. And if you want to know why they're going to go ahead and spend all that money to travel in cross-country games, this list is it. Crypto Wolverine says, with the current conferences, the Big Ten and SEC have 17 of the top 25. And again, that's not counting USC and UCLA. Next year, it could be 19 when Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC. When or if Oregon and Washington join the Big 12 or Big 10, then these two leagues would have 21 of the top 25. It's a Big Two, brother. That's what it is, Aaron. Yep. It's a Big Two. It's a power two now, not a Power Five.
Yeah.
All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. We're back at it again here in 2 weeks with another episode. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, share, follow, whether you're listening on iTunes, watching on YouTube. Help us to find more Big Ten fans just like you, and thank you for all those great reviews. We appreciate each and every one. You can follow us on Twitter in between episodes as well, at Bigger10, all one word, at Bigger10 on Twitter. Until the next time, for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you soon right here on Bigger 10.